Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. US government reopened after a 43-day shutdown, the longest in history, which delayed $50 billion in spending and left over 1 million workers unpaid. However, deep political divisions over health subsidies and other issues remain unresolved, threatening the future stability. Canadian Trade Minister Maninder Sidhu has said Ottawa and New Delhi are rebuilding ties and plan to revive trade talks under a new process after a 2-year freeze as Sidhu and India's Piyush Goyal held talks focused on critical minerals, clean energy, AI and agriculture, with India's trade minister expected to visit Canada soon. After Colombia's deadly Armero volcanic eruption 40 years ago, almost 583 children remain missing to this day, while only 150 children were rescued alive, according to the local foundation. Authorities face criticism for poor record-keeping and irregular adoptions, as DNA testing continues to trace the children to reunite with families. The White House defends President Trump, saying he did nothing wrong after Democrats released emails suggesting that the president had knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse and spent time with the victim. Trump dismisses the disclosures and accuses Democrats of using the Epstein case to distract from the shutdown. Indigenous protesters defend charging the gates of Brazil's COP30 climate summit and clashing with security, saying the action was aimed at demonstrating the desperation of their fight for forest protection. Former U.S. FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James are challenging the legality of U.S. Attorney Halligan's appointment by Pam Bondi. A judge has ordered full records of Halligan's representation amid precedents where Bondi's U.S. Attorney appointments were ruled unlawful in other states. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has stated that reparation loan based on immobilized Russian assets is the most effective option to finance Ukraine. Von der Leyen has also stated that other options to fund Ukraine would be to use HERDM in its budget to raise capital. Now we start with U.S. federal employees return to work today in Washington, the day after President Donald Trump signed legislation ending the 43-day government shutdown, the longest in U.S. history. Federal workers will start receiving pay, national perks will reopen, and essential government services will resume. The shutdown began over a dispute about health care subsidies for low-income Americans. Senate Democrats blocked a temporary funding bill, triggering the stalemate. Some Democrats later broke ranks to end the shutdown, receiving few concessions in return. U.S. President Donald Trump hailed the reopening as a major victory, while Democratic leaders face backlash from their party's progressive wing. The deal funds most federal agencies through January 30th, guarantees retroactive pay for 1.4 million federal workers, and fully funds key programs like SNAP, WIC, and Veterans Medical Care. It also includes funding for Capitol security and protections for lawmakers and Supreme Court justices. Congress must act again by the end of January to avoid another shutdown. Now for this discussion, we welcome David K. Johnston. He's an American author, joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, David, for joining us again. Good to see you. David, now looking at this, how do you think Trump views this shutdown? And how does he plan to leverage the end of 43-day government shutdown to strengthen his political position?
Well, Donald sees himself primarily as a dictator. He has said, I have an Article 2 of the American Constitution that says I can do anything I want. It says nothing of the kind, but it's his assertion that he is all-powerful. And he does not want to provide health care subsidies to about 20 million poor Americans who have not very good but passable health insurance, health care coverage. And he went to court to not have to provide food, nutritional benefits to pregnant women, infants, toddlers, and people in general. It's about 50 million Americans, or 1 in 7, who rely on federal food aid, something that didn't exist 50 years ago because of the changes in the American economy, where all of the growth and benefits have been going to people in the top quarter of the population, and especially the top 10th of 1%. So Donald looks upon this as, see how powerful I am, I got what I wanted. I'm not sure he did. This issue is going to come back up in a matter of weeks at the end of January, and the Democrats are quite firm that they insist that health care not be taken away from 17 million Americans, which will cause healthcare costs for everyone else to go up because there's a smaller pool of people using healthcare services.
And what does Trump's framing of the shutdown resolution as a major victory again indicate about his negotiation strategy with Congress?
Well, Donald frames everything as a victory for him. I mean, we just saw his press secretary say that the new emails further establishing Donald Trump's relationship with the serial child rapist Jeffrey Epstein show he did nothing wrong. I mean, anything that happens that's negative to Trump, they just assert it's a positive because that's the nature of how he operates, and he has for the almost 40 years I've known and covered him. But Trump will try and use this to see if he can set wedges between various Democrats. If he can somehow exploit this to get some Democrats who are in what may be tough re-election districts next year to ease off, that will be his primary goal, because he's not interested in health care for anyone. He has said now for 10 years that we need to repeal the Affordable Care Act, the signature achievement of Barack Obama, but he's never come up with another plan. He just says we have concepts of a plan. And the reality is Donald doesn't care about poor people, and he's demonstrating he doesn't care.
Tell us that from your extensive coverage of 4 decades on Trump, why is he so distant, or why is he so untouched with the reality over, does he know of the fact that so many American people live in poverty and a lot of lives depend on the food program like SNAP?
No, Donald is not really connected with these things. He's never ridden the subway, taken a taxi, gone through poor neighborhoods. He lives in a world of people who are extremely wealthy folks. He just held this Great Gatsby party after the novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald, a gaudy, glaring display at Mar-a-Lago of enormous amounts of wealth and decadence. And so he's disconnected. He thinks people earn much more money than they do. He thinks they have far more in resources than they do. But fundamentally, Donald has no empathy for anyone. And frankly, if you had grown up in the household he grew up in with a monster of a father and a cold and distant mother, you might have turned out like Donald Trump and not have any empathy for anyone else, any sense of sympathy for their state.
David K. Johnston, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you on our next discussion as well. Now, we stay on this topic. U.S. lawmakers have released over 20,000 pages of documents from the estate of disgraced financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The released material reportedly includes email exchanges that mentions U.S. President Donald Trump. Moreover, Democrats on the House Oversight Committee have published emails between Epstein and his longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. The committee has shared also communications between Epstein and author Michael Wolff, who has written several books about Trump. Soon after this, House Republicans have countered with their own documents. They've accused Democrats of selectively leaking material to slander the U.S. president. In an attempt to corroborate Trump's stance, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has also defended the U.S. president, claiming that the emails were only leaked to create a false narrative. Now, if we look into the email exchanges between Epstein and Michael Wolff, we will be able to get some insight into Epstein's relationship with Trump ahead of the 2016 election. One such email apparently discusses strategies to handle questions about Trump's connection to Epstein. In a related development, it has been revealed that emails linked to former Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor are also included in the documents. One of the emails reportedly shows former Prince Andrew denying any knowledge of alleged sexual activity involving a masseuse. Furthermore, the documents also show that Andrew and Epstein maintained contact long after Andrew claimed their relationship had ended. This latest document release comes after Andrew was invited to testify before the House Oversight Committee. However, Andrew has yet to respond to the committee's request for testimony. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back David K. Johnston. He's an American author, joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, David, for staying with us. Now, looking at this newly released Epstein emails mentioning Trump on his public image and political narrative, how do you think Trump will continue to deny any wrongdoing and continue to defend himself? Also, how long can he continue distancing himself?
Well, at some point, we're going to see a lot of the material. Under federal criminal procedure rules, the estate is entitled to get back or to get copies of everything that was seized except contraband. And if there are, as there's good reason to suspect, video and still images of Donald Trump engaged in acts with underage girls, the government could withhold those, saying that they're contraband. They are, under the law, illegal to possess. The estate could then say, well, we want a detailed description if you're going to withhold it, because we may go to court to get them. What adult men are in these photographs? And it's quite clear from the roughly 200 young women who've given sworn testimony in civil matters that Trump is not the only man involved with underage girls. Trump is going to deny it. If photographs come out, you can be sure that Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, will say, oh, fake photo, that's not real, it's not real. And of course, we have ways with electronic media to establish if a photograph has been altered in any way. That's not going to stand up. So the primary goal of the Trump administration has to be keep this under wraps, because once it gets out there, it's going to be much more difficult for Trump. I'm in the school that Trump cannot survive as president with irrefutable evidence of his involvement with underage girls as young as 13. There are a lot of people, however, who think he can, that he will, in fact, talk his way out of this. And there's no way of knowing until we get release of the documents. But eventually, we're going to see more. By the way, the most important email yesterday was the one in which Jeffrey Epstein offered a New York Times reporter, who was later dismissed for being corrupt, that he had photos of Donald Trump with young girls in bikinis. And of course, what any good reporter would have done at that point is say, well, I'd like to see those, but do you have anything that's more newsworthy, meaning undressed young girls? Instead, the reporter didn't act on it, and that's very damning to both the Times and its former financial correspondent who knew Epstein.
Yes, it is. It is very darning. And also, you know, you mentioned earlier about Trump's upbringing in our earlier discussion, like with a very cold mother and strict, expecting a strict father who expected so much from Trump. What do you think? What does this character of Trump reveal about his accountability and character looking at this Epstein and his how he distances himself?
Yeah, Donald's father taught his sons that you have to win, and win meant get the money without getting indicted. He was such a monster that when a neighbor boy who was 7 or 8 years old at the time dropped a quarter on the sidewalk, Fred went and grabbed it, held it up into the face of the boy and go, "That's mine now." Well, who does that to a little child but a monster? And throughout his career, Donald has managed to escape accountability. He beat 4 different federal grand juries when he was in his 30s. He violated rules and laws all over the place and never suffered more than a fine, even though judges and adjudicative panels found again and again that he had essentially thumbed his nose at the law. He had children as young as 12 gambling in his casinos. You have to be 21 to gamble. And he gave them liquor and limousines and hotel rides. He could have gone to jail for that. Instead, he paid a fine. He actually cheated novice roulette players at one of his casinos. Nothing happened to him. His whole life, he's proven very adept at getting around law enforcement, as he was taught to do by the man he called his second father, the notorious American lawyer Roy Cohn, who was the counsel to the Senate committee that was investigating supposed communist infiltration of the Eisenhower administration back in the early 1950s. So Donald just has no belief that he should be held accountable. And he has only in his entire life that I know of, and I've written 3.5 books about him, only once ever said he made a mistake. And that was when he said earlier, about a year ago, I never should have left the White House in 2021.
Wow.
He doesn't acknowledge mistakes or errors in judgment or wrongful conduct.
Well, very insightful. Thank you very much for David K. Johnston for joining us and sharing that insight on this topic as an American author. Thank you very much. Now we stay in the region. President Trump's approval rating has hit its lowest point since taking office for his second term, according to Decision Desk HQ polling average. Trump's approval stands at 42% with a disapproval rating of nearly 55%. This dip comes amid a record 40-day government shutdown, though Congress is poised to end the stalemate. Senate Democrats helped Republicans advance a government funding bill through January, with a separate vote on health care subsidies expected in the White House on Wednesday. Trump has generally maintained approval in the mid-40s throughout his presidency, but experts note it's difficult for any president to stay above 50%, especially with economic frustrations and the country's current track. Meanwhile, a new IPSOS poll shows Democrats are more enthusiastic about voting in 2026, with 44% saying they are very enthusiastic compared to just 26% of Republicans. Now for this discussion, we welcome Rachel Rizzo. She's a non-resident senior fellow at Atlantic Council, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Rachel, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now looking at this, to what extent does government shutdowns historically affect presidential approval ratings, and how does Trump's situation compare?
I mean, look, this is the longest government shutdown in history. It went along for 41 days, I think the final number is. And so I think it's kind of tough to compare what this approval rating means for Trump when you look at, say, the Obama shutdown of 2013 or the shutdown in Trump's previous term. But what I will say is that I think his second term, Trump's second term, has been marked by a lot more ups and downs, I think, than when he came into office the first time in early 2017. This time around, he has a much bigger team around him. He's been able to hire people in his administration that potentially would not have worked for him the first time. And what that has meant is that they've been able to push through more of their policies, creating more disruptions within government and within the Democratic Party as well, which then in turn led to this shutdown, because the Democrats are really trying to push back and stop some of Trump's more authoritarian tendencies. And so I think it's not surprising that his approval ratings are hovering in the 40%, as you mentioned. It actually is higher right now than at a comparable point in his first term, which was around 28%. But let's see if the shutdown end results in a potential bump for his approval ratings.
And how significant is the reported enthusiasm gap between Democrats and Republicans for voter turnout, and how could it influence upcoming elections?
I think polls are pretty difficult to read sometimes because it really depends on who they're speaking to, who is responding. And so it's always good, I think, to read polls with sort of a critical eye and to take it with a grain of salt. But what I will say is that during the elections last week, where Zoran Mamdani won the mayorship in New York City as a self-proclaimed Democratic socialist. You had big Democratic wins in places like New Jersey and places like Virginia. I think before that, the Democrats were really thinking to themselves, how do we stop this juggernaut, which is Trump and his team? And I think these wins last week in some pretty important key positions gave the Democrats some of the push and inspiration, I would say, that they needed to get back into these races and to be more excited and hopeful about the midterms, which, as you know, are coming up less than a year from now at this point. It seems crazy that time moves by so fast. It seems as though Trump only just entered office, which he did less than 10 months ago.
Yes, indeed. And thank you for sharing that insight on this, Rachel Rizzo. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now moving to Iran, Iran has sharply condemned the United States at the United Nations. In a formal letter to the Security Council, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has accused Washington of backing Israel's military strikes against Iran this year. Araghchi cited recent remarks by U.S. President Donald Trump, and Trump has reportedly acknowledged America's role in overseeing the attacks. Iran warned the Council that such actions threaten regional peace and stability. The letter calls for the international community to hold the U.S. and Israel accountable. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Rachel Rizzo. She's a non-resident senior fellow at Atlantic Council, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Rachel, for staying with us. Now looking at this, how could President Trump's reported acknowledgement of U.S. involvement in strikes against Iran influence the international perceptions of American foreign policy?
Absolutely. So I think when you look back at the campaign that Trump won and the platform that he ran on, he told everyone that he was a president of peace, no new wars, right? And I think that that message clashes with what has actually happened on the foreign policy front during his presidency. You watch what's happening down in the Caribbean and Venezuela at the moment. That points to a potential conflict zone in the future for the United States. But also the war between Israel and Iran earlier this year is a very clear indication that this message that Trump did not want to get involved in new wars is maybe not true, because there was a very real risk of escalation when Israel decided to bomb the Iranians at some of their main nuclear sites last June. And so Trump coming out and saying things like, I was very much in charge of that, or that he had a say in what the Israelis were doing, I think offers proof that there might have been U.S. involvement here, but also goes to show that there is a lot more uncertainty when it comes to Trump's message of peace and no war, and what that might mean for the future of U.S. foreign policy, not just during this time in Trump's presidency, but the future in terms of the Republican Party as well. So it's something to watch very closely, I would say.
Yes, indeed. And, as you rightfully mentioned, that Trump earlier was stating or emphasizing that there will be no wars if he becomes president. And one of the claims after he took office, he's in what highlights from his UN's Council talk was that UN is ineffective. And how do you think, how effective is UN Security Council mechanisms in addressing accusation of state-backed, in this case, US-backed Israeli military actions?
Yeah, I mean, in this sense, I think Trump is really correct. I think many people, you talk to Democrats, you talk to Republicans, you talk to really anyone, I think globally, they would say that the UN, especially the UN Security Council, is a pretty ineffective body. It has outlived the time that it was created for. So when you have countries like Russia and China both on the UN Security Council, alongside countries like France, alongside the United States, it becomes very difficult to push through meaningful actions because these countries are on opposite sides when it comes to things like governance, when it comes to things like the so-called liberal world order and how that might be interpreted. So I understand and agree and sympathize with Trump and the many other people who say that it's time for the UN Security Council to be reformed, and how that happens, I think, is a much broader question that is much more difficult to answer.
Yes, indeed. With that, I would like to thank Rachel Rizzo for joining us today, all the way from Washington, D.C., and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now, moving on, and we stay in the region, former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James will ask a federal judge to dismiss criminal charges against them. According to them, the U.S. attorney who secured the indictments against them was unlawfully appointed. Now, the hearing that is set to take place in Alexandria, Virginia, will be the first time a judge will ever consider the defense's efforts to have the charges dismissed before trial. The arguments are likely to focus on whether Lindsey Halligan, former President Donald Trump's personal attorney, was improperly installed as interim U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. If Halligan's appointment is deemed unlawful, the charges against Comey and James could be invalidated. It is important to note that Halligan was the only prosecutor to prevent evidence to the grand juries in both the cases. The defense will argue that Halligan's appointment violates a federal law limiting interim appointments to a 120-day term. So far, former FBI Director James Comey has pleaded not guilty to making false statements and obstructing Congress. Moreover, New York Attorney General Letitia James, too, has pleaded not guilty to charges of bank fraud and lying to a financial institution. This comes after former U.S. Attorney Eric Siebert was removed following his reservations about the evidence against Comey and James. The arguments will now be heard by federal judge Cameron McGowan Curley, who was assigned to this case due to the controversy surrounding Siebert's appointment. Meanwhile, the U.S. Justice Department will defend Halligan's appointment, insisting that the Attorney General is within the law to make additional appointments. And that's a wrap on America 360. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.